All right, boys and girls, we are back for another edition of The Big Ben Show. You can follow me, Ben Domenech, on X at bdomenech. Follow the show on X and Instagram at Big Ben Show Fox. And I'm coming to you today with the latest edition of The Spectator, hot off the presses. Goodbye, New York City, a cover piece by Heather McDonald on Mayor Mamdani, who got his first professional job last night in New York City.
We will prove that there is no problem too large for government to solve and no concern too small for it to care about. After all, if anyone can show a nation betrayed by Donald Trump how to defeat him, it is the city that gave rise to him. And if there is any way to terrify a despot, it is by dismantling the very conditions that allowed him to accumulate power. This is not only how we stop Trump, it's how we stop the next one. So hear me, President Trump, when I say this. To get to any of us, you will have to get through all of us. After all, the conventional wisdom would tell you that I am far from the perfect candidate. I am young, despite my best efforts to grow older. I am Muslim. I am a Democratic Socialist. And most damning of all, I refuse to apologize for any of this.
I want to circle back to the first thing you heard from Zohran Mamdani. We will prove there is no problem too large for government to solve and no concern too small for it to care about. To me, that's the most damning of all. And it's also the scariest aspect of what he is going to bring to the new New York City, run truly by a Marxist, socialist, a communist, someone who is absolutely the most extreme person we have ever seen in such a role, and one who has no background that should allow for anybody with a brain to have any real faith in his effectiveness as an executive, as someone who is running the biggest city in America. Look, I think that New York City is not necessarily the kind of cultural signifier, the kind of political signifier that dictates what's going to come next in terms of the direction of the country. But it is, I think, a signifier in the direction of the Democratic Party. And combined with some of the other things that happened on Election Day, I think it shows us just how extreme they are becoming. I've been warning about this as you've listened to me over the last couple of months, but I truly believe this election confirms just how extreme this party is and their extreme expectations for their candidates. It wasn't really a surprise that Abigail Spanberger, that Mikey Sherrill won in New Jersey or in Virginia. These are both states that went strongly for Kamala Harris, even in the 2024 election that Donald Trump won handily. At the same time, they won by significantly more than Kamala Harris, by double digits, by raking up a lot of support from well-educated suburbanites, particularly women, who have been active and very loud as part of the No Kings protests and things like that over the past couple of months. These are the same people who were more than willing to look the other way when it came to the attorney general race in Virginia, where Jay Jones beat the popular attorney general incumbent, Jason Miyares. Many people in Virginia understood that when Miyares opted to run for re-election, as opposed to running for governor, leaving that for Winsome Sears to do, that he was making the wise political choice that this was going to be a difficult cycle and that historic trends would lead you to believe Republicans didn't have a shot in the Old Dominion. But it was also an indication that he had some confidence that he would be able to win his job back against a pretty radical Democrat legislator who had no record on law and order whatsoever, and who doesn't have the kind of experience that Miyares has in terms of shutting down, prosecuting crimes, and bringing down both the murder rate and many other crimes across the Commonwealth and in many key vicinities where they had gone soft on crime under past administrations. That turned out to not matter at all, and neither did the texts that Jay Jones sent fantasizing openly about assassinating the then Republican Speaker of the House, a colleague, about wishing that his children, who he had met previously, ages 5 and 2, would die in the arms of their mother in order to have them learn a political lesson. That's now the Attorney General of the Commonwealth of Virginia, a role that has been, as you might expect, occupied by many prominent figures from America's founding. That is really astounding. It is at odds with everything that we understand about the Virginia way, about the way of applauding and upholding civic respect and a level of responsibility incumbent upon politicians to see and work with people across the aisle on many issues. That type of old collegiality is completely gone in this day and age. The Washington Post wrote an editorial that really read as an endorsement of Miyares right before this election day, in which they said that partisanship versus basic human decency was on the ballot, and partisanship won. It won easily. And that's something that I think is a lesson about today's Democratic Party. It doesn't hurt you at all to, in fact, fantasize about assassinating your political opponents. It doesn't hurt you at all to think that it would be great if their kids died in a way that made them feel pain for your own political aims. That is actually something that you could consider an asset. It shows you it shows the people how devoted you are to these radical ideas. And, for the people who continued to vote for Jay Jones, even well after those stories came out, it was something where they didn't consider it to be disqualifying at all. That tells us, I think, a lesson about this country, and it's one that I believe is going to only spread within a Democratic Party that no longer has any auspices towards holding that, when they go low, we go high. This is when they go low, we go lower and lower and lower. And that's going to be the experience, I think, that is going to be felt by a lot of Republicans. It's not unique to Donald Trump. It's going to be the way that they apply their forces in the future, via lawfare, via personal attacks, via trying to scare people out of running or expressing their views, the views, obviously, of half of the country. They are going to try to hound conservatives out of public life, and they are going to try to scare them, and they are, frankly, going to lean into this type of assassination language that we have seen abound during the past election cycle. One prominent leftist X account responded to the election of Zohran Mamdani by suggesting that the first order of business would be to look into the concealed carry permits for Barry Weiss's security group. That's the time that we're in right now, and we should be clear-eyed about it. There is no negotiation with that type of terrorism, and we should not treat it with civic respect because it has none for you, for your family, or for anyone who agrees with your politics. I'm Ben Domenech. You're listening to another edition of The Big Ben Show. You can follow us on X and on Instagram at Big Ben Show Fox. We'll be right back with Caroline Downey and then with Charles Murray right after this. I'm happy to welcome to the Big Ben Show now Caroline Downey. You can follow her on X at Caroline Downey _. She is a National Review columnist, and I want to thank you, Caroline, because you've been doing battle on the airwaves over the past several months over the issues that are coming to a fore in New York City, and I know that you can bring your expertise about what's gone on there to us today. Let me start with this. Was there any hope at all once Zohran Mamdani had become the nominee of the Democratic Party in New York to blocking him? Was that just all a gigantic waste of time?
There wasn't a ton of hope, and especially because the field remained very crowded up until the last minute, and we needed some candidates to drop out, and they didn't. One did, Adams, but it was too little too late, I'm afraid. But why I say there was little to no optimism for the Republicans or even the moderate Democrats, the Cuomo dynasty, is because the base of Mamdani was not going to change their mind. That is the downwardly mobile wannabe elites, college graduates saddled with a boatload of student loan debt. They still feel disenfranchised, and they're very hell-bent about that. Clearly, the turnout in this election was driven by Gen Z, those people who are 18 to 29 and even a little bit older. that live in the city, and they thought they would have achieved a lot more clout and success at this point in their lives after the system told them to get a bachelor's degree, which is now as ubiquitous as water and doesn't really have the industrial value that it was promised. So it's those people that still were Mamdani's momentum drivers, and they dug in their heels. They weren't persuaded by the arguments against socialism and communism and all that fear-mongering, although it's true, and Mamdani's policies are woefully misguided, and I believe they will backfire on the very things that Gen Z wants to change, like the housing crisis. Rent freezing is going to exacerbate that shortage, but they didn't care. For them, this was their hopeful ticket to recover their lost socioeconomic ground, and they were willing to take that chance, even if it meant the blue-collar working class that Mamdani claimed to be the champion of was actually going to get left behind, and they have been.
The emphasis on affordability was the way that a lot of places framed Mamdani's appeal. Do you really think that was the major factor, or was this more preying on the politics of envy and resentment and backlash to national political trends, to, kind of the decrepit Cuomo wing of the New York Democratic Party that still persisted? Did it have more to do with that than the affordability conversation?
So I actually think it's both. I think the reason why the affordability pitch was so salient to Mamdani's base was because of the resentment and the bitterness that these kind of disgruntled wannabe elites felt towards the system. And that included the Democratic establishment. They're skeptical of the establishment across the board, all of those institutions that they were supposed to trust, they believe have failed them. The way this works with young people, I'm Gen Z, I really believe this is how we can think about this. If you're Gen Z and you are growing up in this very turbulent kind of economic world, obviously Trump's economy is infinitely better than Biden's, but the fact is that housing is probably going to be unattainable in our lifetimes. So there's a lot of things that milestones we thought that we would have by now that we are not going to have. We are very much a renter's society. And so if you feel like that as Gen Z, which New Yorkers definitely did, because all of the socioeconomic problems are amplified there, it's just a high concentration of these people from the Ivy Leagues and the NESCAC schools, then you either become a Bernie bro populist or you become a Trump populist. You can diverge in one of two ways. And so I think what we saw, obviously, in New York City was the Mamdani wing winning out. And it's because of the resentment, class resentment, but not proletariat versus bourgeois. I do think we need to understand from the audience, it's not like this is a socialist revolution in the Marxian sense. What this is a civil war within the elites themselves. There are people who are not quite elites, and they thought they would be by now. Those are the people that are throwing off the yoke of the Cuomo dynasty, and they're the ones who are voting in this new blood with these, very nice sounding euphemistic ideas, and they're just taking a chance on him.
Yeah, in fact, Byron York of the Washington Examiner had tweeted out a pretty significant, I think, series of data points on how Mamdani essentially came down to whether you had a degree or not. And if you didn't have a degree, you were not voting for him. And if you did, you did. And that's something that I think is very much at odds with the way that this is framed as being some kind of great rising up organically of the people, throwing off those elites. And of course, the folks at Condé Nast, the New Yorker cover has already put him, on the cover of the subway, riding along with all the different citizens of New York. They, were Condé Nast as a whole did this whole switcheroo where they went from being Zohran skeptics to putting him on the cover of Vanity Fair, Bon Appetit talking to him about how important it is to be able to eat food with your hands, all these types of things that were kind of ridiculously over the top at the same time that he's, palling around with the Soros kid. Mm-hmm. Do you think that the measure of his actual success will matter, or will all of those forces that basically got together to pull him over the finish line when there was that brief moment of skepticism about him, Do you think that they are basically just going to be playing a spin everything, don't cover anything that's going to hurt Mamdani for the foreseeable future?
Yeah, I would say most of these mainstream publications and magazines are going to be running all the puff pieces, very glowing coverage, because Mamdani is their poster child now of this new progressive movement. But I do think cautionary tale, though, for the Republican Party is not to over extrapolate what's going on in New York City. Yes, Mamdani was successful. However, if you look at the data from last night, he didn't overperform. I mean, Cuomo also had high turnout. I mean, it's not like this was this slam dunk landslide for the radical candidate. There was a significant pushback from the moderate Democratic forces, and maybe that would have been more so had, Curtis Sliwa dropped out earlier, had Cuomo not been so unpopular and had so many voters had a bad taste in their mouths because of his corruption and past scandals. So we should be wise not to overinterpret what went on with Mamdani, because I don't think nationally it's going to perform. It's not going to apply in the swing states, in the Rust Belt, in Nebraska. There is a high concentration of, like I said, these elite people in the Commie Corridor, gentrified parts of Brooklyn and Astoria, up the East River, all these very blue enclaves in New York City that don't necessarily represent the rest of the country.
The question, of course, about what he's going to be able to do has been on the minds of a lot of people, and I've been asked it myself. Certainly there are limitations, and there are things that he has promised that he's not going to be able to do. But in terms of the things that he is going to be able to do, what's the one that you believe, 1, 2, or 3 things that he's planning that will have the most impact and that you are the most concerned about in terms of the effects on the city?
Well, most of his policies are very expensive. We already know that. He was not shying away from talking about, he didn't talk about the price tag necessarily because that's unpopular, but we know it's going to be an astronomical cost, and to get the revenue to pay for those proposals, he's going to have to work with Albany. And Kathy Hochul, we don't know if we can trust her at this point, because I think she cares more about her personal political brand than maybe the longevity of the party or the Democrats at large.
They were saying, let's go Bills, not tax the rich. That's what she
said.
So.
She basically did a George H.W. Bush, read my lips, no new taxes. She said, Mamdani, we can't afford to lose any more wealthy to Palm Beach. So she's cognizant of the fact that it's, the top percent that kind of holds the city together. They can't afford to run them out of town. And so if she's good on her word and she actually does, reject Mamdani's tax increases, then he's not going to be able to accomplish nearly as much as he wants to. With the rent freezes, I think that's possible that he tries to do that, but it only applies to the rent regulated apartment buildings anyway. So what's going to happen there is the ones that are not already rent regulated, those landlords are going to have to jack up the cost of rent. And so there's going to be plenty of Gen Z people who thought they were going to get cheaper rents, but it's actually the opposite. And that's going to exacerbate, like I said, the housing shortage. And then you're going to have all these buildings that are probably falling into disrepair and are, deteriorating, because what incentive does the landlord have to maintain it if their income is being capped?
Mm-hmm. You said that his ideas are not going to be exported across the country. And I agree with you to an extent. One thing, though, that I do think is definitely going to be exported is his approach to campaigning, which obviously was key to his success and his appeal among Gen Z voters. The New Yorker ran a whole thing about him going to the U.S. Open and people treating him like he was the biggest celebrity there. And it's something that I think put a very happy, smiling, optimistic face on things that are normally said by grim old men with crazy hair like Bernie Sanders. My question to you is, how effective do you think that's going to be? Because it seems to me the thing that's easier to emulate on a certain level, but also requires a certain vacuous nature in order to be able to do that kind of thing. You can't really have the true expression of the radicalism. You have to couch it and hide it and put it in these kind of careful terms. Even in his victory remarks last night, Van Jones was being critical of him because he said it seemed, less happy and uplifting than he'd been on the campaign trail. Do you think that there are going to be socialists and other people of his ilk across the country who adopt that approach and find that it's effective?
Yeah, turns out if you're a really good theater kid, it does tend to
We're surrounded by them.
do well with Gen Z. But, I think it is disingenuous to your point. And you could say that Trump had the Riz factor just like Mamdani does. But the difference is that Trump genuinely cannot be inauthentic. I don't think he's capable, in my opinion, of being inauthentic, almost to a fault. He is just exactly who he is, very transparently, even if it sometimes comes off as callous or bizarre. Mamdani, on the other hand, is very polished and very curated, but we don't actually know who he is beneath that surface. So I think Gen Z is loving it for right now. And I do think that the Democratic Party is going to try to do this happy warrior thing where they say like really radical policies, but it's in beautiful packaging and it's with a smile. The smiling thing, I will say, like, it went a long way. He's just a happy-go-lucky guy. How could you hate on Zohran Mamdani? He's not trying to.
I find it very easy.
We see right through it. But I think it was difficult for a lot of his voters, many voters, to hate him. You can't.
I appreciate the fact that he has the same problem that I do, which is that when you smile, your eyes disappear. The thing that is sticking out to me though about this is contrast it with the reaction to something like Abigail Spanberger winning in Virginia. Something that's more important, I would argue, for the future of the Democratic Party. She ran though as someone who was very robotic and just became known for the fact that she would just like recite these same talking points over and over again. Seemed very inauthentic. She won running away, obviously. What could be called a landslide election, or at the end of the day, it may be roughly the same amount as Ed Gillespie lost. We'll see. But the thing that is, for Winsome Sears lost. But I think that the thing there is, in terms of contrasting who Democrats are more excited about as the future of the party, it's not even close, right?
Yeah, well, and I think it's important to separate those two places. I think the New York City case is very different from Virginia. The types of voters, I think it was 3/4 of New York City voters under the age of 30 all voted for Mamdani. So just huge ground support among Gen Z. Virginia, there's obviously a lot more parents, and it already leaned blue. The parental rights revolution under Youngkin was clearly like a real phenomenon, but I think that unfortunately it is gone now, and it's hard for me to understand why, because the transgender activism is still pretty salient. And Spanberger, she's been on the record saying that basically parents are confused about the trans issue and whether a sexual predator should be wandering into their daughter's locker room. So she hasn't messaged very well on what is a 80-20 issue for the country, and yet she still won despite her robotic nature. And but I think the party is torn, definitely torn, of course, between the old guard and the new blood, the AOCs and the Schumers. And I think the Democratic Party is obviously going through a civil war of its own.
The takeaways from Virginia obviously focused more on the national level on the attorney general's race. Not something that you normally see happen in terms of people paying attention to that on a state level. But it's because of just the severity and the over-the-top nature of these texts that obviously, congratulations to National Review for breaking that story originally and really changing the dynamic of the race and the conversation around what Jay Jones had to say. The Washington Post called it a contest between partisanship and human decency the day before the election. And obviously partisanship won out. Is this a vindication of basically Democratic politicians embracing the same kind of thing that the craziest wine lady at No Kings rally says or puts on her sign as just like a matter of course? This is just something that is part of being a partisan Democrat now?
Yeah, evidently the party has a problem with fantasizing about death toward their political opponents, and they're unapologetic about that, because even though that story made so many waves, and it really was it was exposing of the Democratic Party and how casual and flippant they are with wishing harm on their political adversaries. These are just people that disagree with them about ideas, but it didn't seem to deter many voters. I saw some data that showed that a lot of Virginia's female voters still turned out in large numbers for Jay Jones after those text messages surfaced. So, I mean, what does that tell you? This is supposed to be the group that is all about empathy and is very sensitive to things like death threats and things that are unsavory on someone's record. And evidently they felt this was a rallying cry of some kind, that they were going to double down on that. That was stupefying in many ways. And I do think that this is part and parcel to the Democratic Party now, is that political violence, or at least the justification of political violence, is very much the norm. I mean, going back to the Luigi Mangione discourse and the way that Taylor Lorenz was very pro those who were supporting Luigi Mangione, and it's gotten worse since, obviously culminating in Charlie Kirk's assassination. And it's frightening, but I do think it's coming mainly from one side. The partisanship, hyper-partisanship is bad all around for the political temperature in this country. But I do think that Democrats are way more casual about it.
Mm-hmm. Let's wrap up with this question. At this moment, the extreme wing of the Democratic Party that you describe feels very emboldened. They feel like they've achieved things with this, building on the success that they created around the rise of AOC. A lot of the same DSA volunteers and leaders who came out of that experience were key to Mamdani's rise. They feel like they are the exciting aspect of the party, that, Nancy Pelosi's retiring. Lord knows how long Chuck Schumer is going to be able to hang on. You see a real shift there away from a Democratic Party that felt like it needed to couch everything in kind of culturally traditional terms, or that they needed to get away from some of the extremes that led to Kamala Harris's problems on the campaign trail when she became the nominee. Do you view that ascendant, that rising element of the Democratic Party as the likeliest inheritor of their next mantle for the presidential nomination? We're 3 years out from it. We have, they've got time. But this is a situation where they certainly feel very emboldened about the capacity to basically demand things of the party that they've never been able to demand when their biggest advocate, their most popular politician, was an aging socialist from Vermont. They seem much more happy warriors now and excited about the future. Do you think that they have a real possibility of taking things over, not just in the conversation, but in practical terms?
Well, I think what we're seeing, obviously, is this battle royale playing out between the Chuck Schumers and the Nancy Pelosi's and the new guard, the AOCs, the Mamdanis, that have a lot of enthusiasm, and they can galvanize a crowd, especially a young crowd, very well. They're much more persuasive. They're also tapping into the concerns of that younger generation, even if they're very misguided. If it's, the housing crisis, okay, well, at least they're talking about it, because the baby boomers of the Democratic Party, that is foreign to them. All they know is that, home ownership was like a default rite of passage when they were coming of age, and they're kind of like not paying attention to what young people are dealing with and their financial grief and anxiety. So in that sense, the new guard of the Democratic Party is very sensitive to that. But at the same time, the squad still sets the agenda. But again, how those candidates will perform in those battleground states where, they're saying they're the party of the working class, but Trump is the one who won the working class in the 2024 election. AOC is still very unpopular in Congress. So, and New York City does not reflect the rest of the country. It's a bubble. It's always been insulated from a lot of the struggles that surround it. And I live there and I love it, but I know that's true. So if they try to kind of scale up this Mamdani model, I don't think it's going to work, because this is a very diverse country with diverse interests. And, I don't think anyone brought about a working class revolution like Trump has been able to. Mamdani did not he did not bring about a working class revolution in New York. He said he did, but he did not. It was actually just the downwardly mobile elites who are caught in between the affluent and the working class, but the working class themselves, whether it's the cops, law enforcement, firefighters, those who work in the bodegas, they're the ones who are going to be hurt by the luxury beliefs that Mamdani is putting forward, because when it comes to public safety, they're the ones that are going to have to still take the subways where violent vagrants are terrorizing innocent people, whereas those who are in between the 1% and the working class, they can probably avoid that, they can leave, but the working class, they'll just go to Long Island. Why would cops stay in New York City if they could just go to Long Island, where it's safer, there's higher pay, it's like less challenging, environment. But that is the state of play.
Caroline, you're not planning to move to Palm Beach, are you?
No,
I'm one of those cliched conservatives.
I am not. I'm staying put in New York City. If I have to go to Hoboken, I will. But I do think you need people to stay back and actually fight for this city. There's plenty of common sense people still left. But like I said, there's no incentive for them to stay. So you can't blame them for going to Long Island. The descendants of the voters who voted for Rudy Giuliani 30 years ago, they've all left for Long Island. So, I mean, that's just what happens when you literally you push these people out. You say, we don't want you here, and we don't care if you leave.
Caroline Downey is a columnist at National Review. You can follow her on X at Caroline Downey _. She's going to be speaking Saturday the 15th to Young America Foundation events at Santa Barbara, and then on Tuesday the 18th at Arizona State University. So you can go and see her there. Thank you so much, Caroline, for joining the Big Ben Show today.
Thank you.
Happy to be joined on the Big Ben Show today by the great Charles Murray. You can follow him on X at Charles Murray. He is the author of a great many amazing books, including his latest, Taking Religion Seriously, which is one of the most personal things that you can find from Charles in all of his writing. And I found it to be very interesting in so many different respects in charting his path through faith and doing so in a pretty interesting and I think helpful way for a lot of people who've wrestled with what he's wrestled. Charles, first off, let me just ask you, you opened the book by acknowledging that you didn't think that you were going to write this because you didn't think that many people would be interested. Well, what made you change your mind?
It all came about because of a interview by my colleague Nick Eberstadt, which is being conducted kind of videos for AEI, American Enterprise Institute's Institutional History. And somehow in this 3-hour interview, we got onto religion. And I was describing my rather eccentric route toward Christianity. And Nick, who is a devout Catholic, enjoyed this. I think he found it entertaining. and at the end of it, after they turned off the cameras, he turned to me and he said, "You want to make it your next book?" And I reacted first with surprise. It had never crossed my mind to do a book on religion. And secondly, I said, wait a minute. Yes, there are tens of millions of people like me, people who are well-educated, we are successful, we're happy, and religion has been never an important part of our lives. We aren't militant atheists, but we just haven't paid much attention to it. And I had an experience over many years. This isn't something that happened since COVID or anything like that. It's been going on for 30 odd years. And it's been a long, slow process by a person who does not have what some of my friends call the God gene. If you have the God gene, you can enter into a variety of spiritual insights that a person like me can't. I'm kind of the equivalent of tone deaf when it comes to the equivalent of tone deaf regarding religion. I just don't get a lot of the spiritual side of it easily. But I am an empiricist, and so I used other tools to explore this issue. Long answer to a short question.
I was curious to know what you do when it comes to writing down your daily log, which you reference throughout the book, and is, I think, quite a useful method to track the days that you had certain conversations that are pretty key to this journey.
Yeah, I actually recommend this because if you don't do something like that, the years just turn into a big blob that you can't pick apart again. At least they have for me, and it gets worse as you get older. It's not very long. It's on my computer. I have my current file goes back to 2006, but I've been keeping it since the late 1980s. A few lines. It includes what I did that day real quickly, sometimes in such shorthand that I can't figure it out now when I go back to it. And usually I end up by saying what we had for dinner and what my wife and I watched after dinner on TV. So it's and the weather. And it's really useful for looking back and remembering how you did the things you did. Mm-hmm. It is no competition for Pepys or for Chips Shannon or the other great diarists of history.
No, but I find it. I actually find that to be something that I want to introduce in my own life, because I used to have. I used to keep notes so regularly in my work that I could look back at a notebook and see, which day certain things happened and things like that. But since having children, it has become so much less consistent that I can go weeks without having a page of a notebook that has all of that.
Here's just a tip. A tip
yes.
is I do it first thing. I get on the computer. It is absolutely the first thing I do every day. 5 or 10 minutes, it's all done.
That's perfect. I think that's definitely a way to make sure that I do it, as opposed to committing to doing it at the end of the day, when it will often be forgotten. You have this series of conversations during this book that you recall and remember as, over lunch and over a conversation, about something unrelated that then turns in the direction of these things. And I think that that's something that does make you rather unique, in part because you inhabit a world of intellectually serious people who care deeply about things, but are also share a lot of your tendency towards logic and interest in finding the logical answers to things. It seems to me that one of the things that has happened to our culture is that in this era of so many people being agnostic, the rise of religious nuns, NONES, as we've discussed, and I know Nick Eberstadt has written about it occasionally. It is something that I feel like has led to fewer and fewer people having just a conversation about God, about what people believe and why and how they came to it. You relate a specific example with someone who was my boss when I was a White House intern, Pete Wehner, someone you had lunch with regularly, recommending to you Mere Christianity as being a key moment in this journey. Tell us a little bit about that and why it sticks out in your memory so much.
Pete has been a longtime friend, and I have known that he was an evangelical Christian. So I had known that before I had lunch with him at the White House mess, which is, I think, why I felt free to bring it up. Because if I hadn't known that, if I'd known nothing about his religion, I probably wouldn't have. And I think even now about a variety of friends I have and have known for a long time, and I haven't the least idea what they believe religiously. In a way, it's sort of like talking about politics with someone that you don't know their politics and you don't want to get into an argument with them. And religion can be a hot button thing like that. It's kind of too bad, because in the case of Pete, the fact that I did ask that question allowed him to say, oh, I really became a Christian by being convinced of the facts of the matter. And the book that got me started was Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis. I go home, I buy the book, I read it, I am, like hundreds of thousands, if not millions of other people, blown away by the book. It is wonderful. And that, in turn, triggers a variety of really wonderful, rewarding things afterwards. I really recommend trying to bring up religion earlier in your friendships with people. You might learn things you didn't expect to learn.
You also did something that you make note of giving it, buying multiple copies and in your case to give to family members. But I'm a big believer in giving people copies of books these days. I think it's something that actually does make it stick. And then you feel obligated to, on some level, to take the time to crack them open before you see the friend again. It may risk the friendship a little bit, but I am a believer in that. You describe Lewis as a smart person who still believed. You put that, it put him in that category mentally. I feel like that's something that we don't have enough of. And I would submit to you that you will probably fall into that category for a great number of people who read this book. Why do you think it is that it has become a mark of the quote unquote public intellectual that we don't discuss religious matters, or that they do not weigh in on them? I remember how remarkable it was when people reacted, for instance, to Francis Collins making some of his statements on, I believe, the Charlie Rose program back in the day, that this was just not something you heard from people of great intelligence and significant roles in government or philosophy or public intellectual sort of activities and the like.
Well, I went to Harvard as an undergraduate, okay? And think about if I'd gone to Harvard in the 1890s. I would have been going to a school as an 18-year-old, maybe from Iowa, although probably not in 1890, but I would have been going to a school that had people like William James on the faculty, whereas he was not known for being conventionally religious, was writing varieties of religious experience, which is deeply respectful of things spiritual. I would have had all sorts of faculty members who I admired, who would be at Memorial Church every Sunday. It would have been a natural part of my growth as a young adult to have taken all this seriously. Instead, I arrived at Harvard in the fall of 1961. None of my professors is religious, at least visibly. None of my friends were religious, not something we talked about. And there was something in the air. It's the zeitgeist, if you want to call it that, that produces what my wife labeled. I quote my wife a lot. I steal some of her best lines. And one of her best lines is, she went to college and she learned that smart people don't believe that stuff anymore. And that's what I learned. I wanted to be one of those smart people. I wanted to fit into that crowd. I wanted to be accepted by them. And I fit in. And 18-year-olds are likely to do that. I think that an awful lot of people who've gone to college and attended a church when they were young had exactly the same experience. That was a childish thing. And when you grow up, you put away childish things.
Oh, you don't believe in that stuff anymore? Do you still believe in Santa Claus? That type of
stuff.
Lewis has a wonderful line about that, by the way, about I've learned to put away childish things such as needing to be very grown up. About why he wrote about fantasy stories and the like. You talk about the internal conversation that happened for you about the universe, the nature of the universe, and how much, as somebody who is wants these logical answers to things, that you wrestled with that on a number of different points before coming to some conclusions about what you believed in that regard. That seems like something that someone can go through their whole life either thinking about all the time or thinking about not at all. and I'm always struck by people who seem to have done the latter. Isn't this the kind of thing that we ought to be talking about more in terms of our understanding? We talk so much about, man's place as it relates to technology, man's place as it relates to, the environment and the like. But rarely, it seems like, do we have a kind of public conversation about what do we really believe about this, the nature of this universe, and how unique it is. It doesn't seem to be an element of conversation. Do you think that that's something that should come back and ought to come back as being something that you don't really go through life not having an opinion about?
Well, 2 points. First is, it seems, I'm with you. How can you not think about the nature of the universe at some points, even if only fleetingly?
Mm-hmm.
Now, that's the first thing I want to get across. The second thing I want to get across is, for non-believers who are very reluctant to get involved with anything involving something like a personal God, here's a good starting point. Think about how weird the universe is from a physicist's point of view, from an empiricist's point of view. And the first thing that I noticed and didn't pay enough attention to is the way that so many important physical laws are mathematically simple. Mm-hmm. There's no real reason for it. There is a reason that the number pi is an endless number of decimal points and never rounds out to anything. Because if you have a circle inscribed within a square, you simply have a mathematical reality which is arbitrary, and there's no reason for it to be simple. But you would think the same is true of something like mass or force or a variety of other things. So these very simple mathematical equations seem extremely unlikely. Mm-hmm. It's almost as if somebody planned it that way. and it's even weirder with mathematics, because even at the outer reaches of theoretical mathematics, a lot of times discoveries there become key to understanding physical phenomena. Quantum mechanics has examples of that. Okay, that was the first nudge. Second nudge I owe to Charles Krauthammer. We had a chess club, informal chess club, which after the bell curve came out, Charles decided to name the Pariah Chess Club because good people shouldn't be associating with me, and to a lesser extent with Charles. Anyway, Charles just mentioned the "why is there something rather than nothing" quotation, which was from Heidegger. I didn't know that. Well, I would advise people just to stop and contemplate that. Why is there something rather than nothing? There are good arguments for saying it's not as important as you think it is. They weren't impressive to me. But the thing that really gets you going when thinking about the universe is the physics of the Big Bang. And I really urge listeners to read into it, and you can do it easily. Mm-hmm. I'm sure that Grok or one of the other AI programs could give you a nice summary of it. But it boils down to this. The accepted origin of the universe among physicists is the Big Bang. The universe originated in a singularity, a point without mass or dimensions, happened instantaneously, and physicists can give you a very precise description of what happened a trillionth of a second after the Big Bang started. They don't know what started the Big Bang. All right.
No.
And the weirdness of the Big Bang is that there are a whole variety of things, of parameters. It's a good use of that word. Parameters which, if they had been slightly different, would have produced a universe of black holes, would have produced a universe of radiation. But to have life, you must have stars, and stars can create planets, and planets can support life. And the chances that these parameters would have all combined to permit that physical process are 1 in trillions. And I'm not using trillions in the same way that people use gazillions. I mean, literally 1 in trillions. And it seems incumbent on us to say, do you really think we live in a 1 in trillions chance? Mm-hmm. Or is it more plausible, more parsimonious to say, The universe was created intentionally to permit, among other things, the support of life. Now, that seems to be more parsimonious, and I'll put it another way. To insist on saying, no, we live in a 1 in trillions chance does not sound to me like an empiricist making sense. It sounds to me like someone who has an invincible, inalterable faith that there cannot be a God. Okay?
In reading your book, it reminded me of a quote from Chesterton's Everlasting Man, where he writes, it is stark hypocrisy to pretend that 9/10 of the higher critics and scientific evolutionists and professors of comparative religion are in the least impartial. Why should they be impartial? What is being impartial when the whole world is at war about whether one thing is a devouring suspicion or a divine hope? Which has always struck me as being a real problem for the rise of people who basically just say, I don't think about this, or I don't know and I don't care, and I don't, and increasingly people who answer the questions of pollsters. For a while there, we were getting, quite a number of trends of people who would say, well, I'm spiritual but not religious. And now we have the rising number of trends who basically say, well, I'm not spiritual and not religious, and I just don't think this matters at all. I don't even have, enough gumption to embrace atheism, as at least, an opinion about something. Do you think that is a trend that is in some sense irreversible in the West and in America particularly, or is it one that is of this moment, and perhaps this is just the ebb and flow of revivals and that type of thing historically?
Well, my crystal ball here, I could look at the statistics on attendance to churches and so forth, and it looks like it's down into the pit, and it's not going to stop. I also look at the fact that my book came out, 6 months after Ross Douthat published a book called Belief. And during the last couple of years, you've had a variety of other public intellectuals who have been saying nice things about religion and about Christianity. And in a way, already among the public intellectual crowd, religion is respectable in a way that it was not respectable in the 1990s. And let me just add a third reason to think that we're going to bring back a whole bunch of people. And that is, I think the relationship of science to religion is in a way reversing. From, let's say 1500 to 1900, science explained away a whole bunch of things that religion formerly had explained. And they did so in ways which you could not be a smart person and believe that stuff anymore if the stuff you were believing was that the world was only 5,000 years old. You couldn't do that anymore. Similarly, you couldn't believe that thunderstorms were evidence of God, nor earthquakes or a variety of other things. You also had then Newton's clockwork universe. And then in the 19th century, the body blows began. And Darwin was a huge thing, evolution, huge. So was, in its own way, Freudian psychology, which kind of got rid of sin as a explanation for things. And of course, relativity, with people misusing Einstein's concept of relativity. Now consider the reversals. The first reversal is when physicists come up with the theory of the Big Bang, confirm the theory of the Big Bang, and guess what? They have produced an origin of the universe that echoes Genesis. Which, by the way, is one of the reasons scientists resisted the Big Bang theory for so long. But then look at all the things that quantum physics is posing as questions that as yet have no answers. Entanglement. Entanglement is when two particles instantaneously, the state of one affects the state of the other, regardless of distance and apparently faster than the speed of light. How does that work, since the speed of light otherwise is known to be a constant? And then you have some phenomena which are increasingly being documented in the way that other scientific issues are documented. And I'm referring to, especially to near-death experiences and to this phenomenon called terminal lucidity. Mm-hmm. People who don't know what terminal lucidity is, I'll just quickly summarize it. People with advanced dementia and other diseases which have very profound physiological effects on the brain and in effect make it incapable of organized thought will come back in the day or so before death for a few minutes or maybe an hour or so. And by back, I mean they recognize a spouse they haven't recognized for years and children. They have memories. They have questions to ask, and they have personality characteristics that existed. And then they relapse into their dementia, and next day they die. What's that all about? Mm-hmm. I'm not talking about a few New Age story tales. I'm talking about very well-established bodies of evidence that must be considered from a scientific perspective. And I think that science is now in the state that it was in the late 19th century when it had anomalies to explain in Newtonian physics. Mm-hmm. And explaining those anomalies are going to call into question the whole materialist view of the human brain. Mm-hmm. That consciousness exists exclusively in the brain, and once the brain shuts down, consciousness ends. That is under scientific challenge.
Mm-hmm. Another area that I think is trending or will trend, it may be not trending currently, in that direction, allowing for more public expressions of faith in life, is something that you make reference to in the book, which is the degradation of the arts. That creativity in our modern era has really become, and I think that the AI tendencies, the created pop stars are sort of the nadir of this. It's become so drab. It has become something that is so very conventional, even when it attempts to offend, and it lacks so much inspiration. When I read that portion, I was recalling a letter. We have there's a book that's a collection of the letters between Shelby Foote and Walker Percy, and there's this one letter where Foote is criticizing Walker for having converted, for having found his Catholic faith, and his criticism is not really an objection to the faith; it's that his conversion will lead to him being a worse author. That it will kill his creativity as a novelist. Of course, Foote would go on to be known as a historian, and his novels are not particularly well thought of. And Percy would go on to have an incredible run as a novelist. But it does strike me that this is another area where the smart people, the people who are supposed to be at the center of artistic creativity, in that equivalent, they're not supposed to talk about or think about these things, when in reality, those are the things that historically have inspired the greatest creative, accomplishments that we see. I'm optimistic about that. I actually think that I'm hopeful that things have gotten drab enough that people are going to find inspiration in those fundamental things. Do you think that I'm right to do that, or am I being too hopeful?
No, I'm with you. And take other examples. For example, English departments, some of them no longer require Shakespeare, and others of them you get your English literature degree by reading some really pretty mediocre 20th century novelists, and you don't read the good stuff. My wife was an English PhD, And she says this cannot last. The postmodernist critique of literature cannot last. And the reason is that the great stuff is really great. we aren't making it up.
Yes.
And I remember having that feeling when I was in ninth grade reading The Merchant of Venice.
Mm-hmm.
And suddenly they aren't making it up. There are all these layers of meaning. This is wonderful. And she says, you have people in English departments who love literature. And sooner or later, they are going to reassert themselves and to retake great literature. And in the creation of it as well.
Mm-hmm.
You have had writers inspired in the Western tradition by the triad of the true, the beautiful, and the good, which are religious concepts, albeit originated by Aristotle. And that has been in their heads as something toward which they are striving in one way or another. Doesn't mean you have to write saccharine novels, but you have to write them on big themes. They have to have meat if they're going to survive. Well, when this was thrown out the window in the 19th century, by the end of the 19th century, where the duty of the artist was to challenge the audience, it sort of left authors, and for that matter, visual artists and composers, without this template by which to judge the nature of their creations. Mm-hmm. And so what did they use instead? Their own ideas, which are pretty banal and pretty, pretty unoriginal. And so you get, for novels these days that qualify as high literature, you have an awful lot of thumb-sucking of people, massaging their neuroses at 500-page length. And you know what? Who cares? Mm-hmm. And it's hard enough to get a readership in the first weeks after publication, let alone 100 years after it was written. Meanwhile, you go into bookstores in airports, and you still can probably find Jane Austen for sale. Mm-hmm. And Tolstoy.
Oh, absolutely. My friend Stephen Kent, who cares about this this type of thing a good deal, he was expressing to me recently something that I found very interesting. I was commenting on the fact that we're fans of Christopher Nolan and his films, and it's just interesting that he would choose to do this Odyssey movie, and it just seems kind of out of time in terms of a choice. It's not in keeping with his normal oeuvre. And Stephen, who is the scout leader of a group of Boy Scouts in rural Virginia, told me, well, actually, the Odyssey is the biggest thing among our scouts right now, because there is a viral TikTok musical that of the Odyssey that is essentially on Odysseus' quest back home, that is framed kind of in the style of something like Lin-Manuel Miranda's Hamlet or something like that. It's that type of musical where it's kind of explaining something. But he said they're all about it. They're incredibly excited for this movie, and to me that spoke to the idea that wow, this maybe the greats are the greats because they really were great, and we didn't just lie to a bunch of people for a very long time to say they were great.
yeah, and I think that's true as well of music. Mm. That, by the way, here's one thing. I'll make the case that popular culture in the 20th century was actually pretty vibrant.
Yes.
Now, I'm not sure that hip-hop deserves all of the academic praise that it gets, but I'm pretty sure that Cole Porter is going to survive for a long time. I think the musical, the Rodgers and Hammerstein kind of musical, will survive a long time as well. I think that's all good stuff. But look what happened to high culture music. Arnold Schoenberg, John Cage, the rest of this, boring.
Yes.
It's boring or unlistenable. And Bach is just as beautiful as Bach ever was. And people know that. And so I think we're okay. It's okay to be optimistic about this. We have too many talented people for them to put up with devoting their lives to schlock for very long.
I certainly agree with that. I want to shift to talking about someone who didn't have a lot of tolerance for schlock when it came to ideas. You and I both had the pleasure of attending this recent conference held out at Stanford by the Hoover Institution to praise and feature the works of the great Thomas Sowell. And I found it interesting because I realized I hadn't had many conversations with people who love Tom Sowell's work in life. You know, I have read tons of people's commentaries and reviews and reactions to Tom Sowell, but I have had probably more conversations in that one couple of day period that about his work than I probably had for the past 20 years. And that's certainly since college. And so it's one of these things that was a unique opportunity. One of the things that was surprising to me about that, though, was how much Sowell has had a successful resonance in the era of the ephemeral nature of the internet, that his ideas still punch through and are ever present in memes and posts and quotations and clips, video clips that have gone viral on YouTube and the like, and are well suited for Instagram Shorts and TikToks and the like. I guess I had noticed it, but I'd never really appreciated how significant that was. I wonder if you had noticed it as well, and if it sort of surprised you to see as many people who made reference to it in the course of the conversations of that conference.
Well, what I've noticed, because I'm on X, Twitter, whatever you want to call it, for a long time, and I see these quotes by Sowell that do get a lot of mentions and a lot of reposts and so forth. The man had a genius for saying things in a straightforward manner that the rest of us tend to take 5 sentences to say, and we don't say it as punctually as he does it in one sentence, and we don't say it as well. I mean, the idea is not as clearly expressed. He was brilliant in that regard. And he was saying things that resonate as being true now because so much of the conversation in the last 10 years has been sort of the emperor has no clothes kind of intellectual dialogue, where why are we saying these things when it's all so stupid? And Tom Sowell just punctures those balloons with a sentence. Can I tell a Tom Sowell story?
I was going to ask you to do that next. I was literally going to ask you, what's your favorite Tom Sowell story? It may not be your favorite, but go ahead.
I have had the privilege of having lunch a couple of times with Tom, and not for many years. And we've also had an email correspondence that has gone on. And there are a couple of times he sent me stuff to review, and I've edited that in ways he found helpful, and there are certainly times he has sent me back material that has been helpful to me. But the story I want to tell is I was reviewing the very fine biography of Tom Sowell that was written by Jason Riley. It's called Maverick, and if there are any Tom Sowell fans out there, I really advise you to buy it. Actually, I advise you to buy it if you don't know much about Tom Sowell, because Jason wrote a beautiful summary of overview of Sowell's work. Anyway, I was reviewing it for the Claremont Review of Books, and I'd finished my draft, and I opened the review with a couple of paragraphs about Sowell's youth and early life. Wasn't much, and just an introduction so people know that where he'd come from. And I decided to send my review to Tom to read. I ordinarily would not do that, but if I'm going to be writing about someone's life, I want to make sure that I'm describing it in appropriate ways. Tom had no criticisms to make of my analysis of his work. He made me go through 3 drafts of those first 2 paragraphs. and he basically just wore me down. Mm-hmm. Because here is what Tom Sowell wanted me to do. He wanted me to excise anything that suggested there was the least problem in being a black guy in Harlem in the 1940s. and that there was the least racism he had to cope with. There was anything at all that he was a victim in any way. Mm-hmm. Well, and he did it, by the way, by quoting his own autobiography and so forth, and citing evidence of, for example, white people that had helped him out, and of this, that, and the other thing. But I remember I had one sentence in my original draft which talked about the small indignities that were part of the everyday life of a black man in the 1940s. He would not tolerate that sentence. He didn't remember any small indignity. So anyway, I like to think that everything I write expresses exactly what I think, and I pull no punches. Tom Sowell made me cut some corners I didn't really want to cut.
That is the power of Tom Sowell. He can even force even the great Charles Murray to edit to past the point that he would wish. I think that's a phenomenal story, Charles, and I think that this is a wonderful book, Taking Religion Seriously, and you have, I think, done something that is very significant, and I think it is very well timed. You made reference earlier to Ross's book, which I also read and at the time, and I think you have put this argument forward at a moment when there are a lot of people eager to hear it, especially in these times. You can follow Charles Murray on X at Charles Murray, where he is quite active and expresses himself quite readily. Thank you so much, Charles, for joining the Big Ben Show today.
I always enjoy talking to you, Ben. I appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to another edition of The Big Ben Show, where this week one of the things that I'm thinking about is the level of concern that people have about this current clash going on between Disney, ESPN, and YouTube TV, one that has thrown a lot of people who have cut the cord over the years into a really difficult situation, in part because of this greed being displayed by Disney and ESPN, who want everybody to shift to their very hinky and frankly full of glitches app, which they've now raised and want to invest more people into in terms of a direct way to get their money. The plethora of apps, the things that have really grown up all across the board that now are requirements if you want to pay attention to following a team, even if it's a team that is local, are now proving to be truly a burden on, I think, on sports fans across the country. The last vestiges of people who really do watch actively and don't just wait to stream programming. That type of effect is really being felt now. And I think that this is something that was inevitable, but is also very frustrating for consumers, especially if, you're just a normal middle-class family who's trying to make ends meet. You have to make a lot of determinations now that ultimately, if you are a big fan of a team, require you to pay far more than you were paying for cable in many instances in order to be able to see their games. And that's something that I think is really a disservice to the fans. As much as they are trying to play into the fact that this is the one area where they can really grow the pot, where they can, have more people come in and sign up for these various apps. There's a point where this greed is becoming too disgusting, I think, for people who are fans of franchises that are, quite frankly, not very good. And you're going to see that, I think, have effects when it comes to particularly baseball and basketball, which lack the devotion necessary for football and college football to have an effect on what you're going to see in terms of a market response. The overall demand, of course, is for something that combines more of these things. You might even call it a bundle. And that's something that I think is really the direction that David Ellison is headed with his purchases when it comes to making a play now for Warner Brothers and for HBO, in addition to the CBS marketplace, one that could combine a lot of different services together under one roof. Look, eventually we're going to get to a point where there's just an app that says sports, and you're going to be able to click on it, and you're going to have to pay quite a lot of money for it probably, but you're going to get everything that you need. Until the market can correct along those lines, I think we're going to see more and more of this diaspora of apps where they're creating regular content, thousands of shows that you will never watch or want to watch, but you have to pay for in order to see the one thing you do. That is a market correction, if I ever have seen one, that needs to happen. You've been listening to another edition of The Big Ben Show. You can follow us on X and on Instagram at Big Ben Show Fox. Follow me at Domenech on X. I hope that you'll leave a comment about the kinds of weight financially that you've had to go through in order to see your favorite teams over the past couple of years, and the frustrations involved when you sign up for expensive things and then find that they don't have the games that you want. We'll be back next week with more to dive back into the fray.